Hello, everyone. This is Emily Williams with Quest Oracle Community, and welcome to our PeopleSoft HCM Configuration Series Delegation Framework with Lisa Chow and Sean Abernathy. Just a few housekeeping notes to go over before we get started. All attendee lines are in mute and will stay in mute throughout the session. If you have any questions, please put them into the question drop-down box located on your GoToWebinar panel, and we'll answer those at the end of the session. The session is being recorded and we'll be uploading it to the Quest content library on our website. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Lisa and Sean to get us started.
Thank you, Emily. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Chow. I am a product manager director with PeopleSoft, and I will be going over the fluid delegation framework, but it's kind of a combination of the classic delegation framework and the fluid, as I'll be going over the configuration that may touch both. With me is Sean Abernathy, the Senior Director of Enterprise Components Development, and he will be going over the approvals for delegation, as well as helping to answer any questions that you may have. We will be talking sorry about that, Sean. So we will be talking a little bit about the roadmap, so the safe harbor statement does apply. And today we'll be doing a short introduction to delegations, and I'll then jump into a demonstration so that you understand all what we're talking about. We'll look at the configuration for delegations and then look at the approval setup for it, go over the roadmap, and do some Q&A. What are delegations? They're giving one's authority to another user. Hold on just a second. And that's simply put. So whether it's approvals, initiation, different actions that can be taken, you're basically having someone take those actions in your place. Okay. I want to go over a few roles and terminology because of the fact that we have gone from a classic component to, classic feature to a fluid feature, and some of the terminology has changed. We have the roles of delegator, and this is the person who gives authority to another person, and delegate. This is the person who is granted authority. This used to be called the proxy. So in some cases, you might still see the word proxy, but it's basically the delegate. You have delegated authority, which gives the rights and privileges that are given by the delegator. And then we have the delegation request, which consists of the transaction and the delegation period, which is the date range, where the delegation would be in effect. Revoke is when a delegator withdraws the delegated authority. Okay. So we have two types of delegations. We have approvals, which is the AWE approvals, and it works with the AWE framework. And then we have initiate transactions. These are currently only available for existing HCM transactions. We are looking at possibly adding more transactions. And I guess before we go into all of this, one of the things I should explain is one of the changes we made was that HCM used to use delegations. You may have seen this and say, well, what's the big deal? We already have delegations. Well, we've moved that framework into enterprise components so that it can go across pillars. So that means any pillar that uptakes it, and currently it's in FSCM and HCM, you will be able to, if you have a clustered environment, you'll be able to commingle those delegations and see them all at once. Okay. So that was really the big change. And of course, we made some of these components fluid. So let's go ahead and look at see what it looks like now. We'll go to the demonstration. So let me, okay. So here I am, and I'm logging in as Jay Patterson. And I don't know about you guys, but my system seems to, things seem to be running just a little bit slower nowadays with everybody working from home. Okay, so on the manager self-service homepage, I've put a delegations tile. So we have delivered delegations tiles. In a clustered environment, which this is, you will see that on say the Portal environment, you will see 3 different delegations tiles, and they will go to each of the environments, or you can have it singly on, say, the HCM environment like I have here. So we have 3 new tiles, create delegation requests, my delegates, and my delegated authority. Let's go ahead and look at the create delegation request first. Okay. So here's where you started, and you're saying, you know, what your dates are. So in this case, I'm going to do a future dated delegation. I don't have to put in an end date. So if you're putting in a delegation and you don't know when it may end, say you need coverage for when you're working on a project and you don't know how long that's going to take, or if you're going out on some type of leave that you don't know when you'll be back, or even an administrator could put this in for someone who has left the company and you are temporarily delegating the authority until somebody takes their place. So in this case, let's put it on as PTO coverage. Okay. And here you will see, and I will show this in the setup, but we have only shown delegates right now that are related to this person, to John Patterson. So it is the people that work for him, as well as his people who report to his manager. So let's select Christelle and Edmund. So if we wanted to, we could also add a delegate. So we click on this, and even if you don't see them here, you can just search for them and add them in. And as you can see, this is done on, this is now in an activity guide so that we can just go from step to step and it'll walk the person through doing, creating that delegation request. So here we have all the transactions that they could delegate. And if you wanted to filter it, say, well, I just want to delegate approvals, we can go ahead and click on the approval and will filter it. Okay. So let's look for the reported time change and say, let's do approved payable time. Figure people have to get paid, we have to approve time, everything else maybe can wait. Or you may want to give that to someone else. So we go to the last page here, and it is basically a review, and you submit from here. So normally it wouldn't take this long. I am in a development environment where we do have hundreds of other databases, so it is sometimes a little slow. So here it takes you back to the dashboard, and you can look at my delegates to see who you have delegated. Okay. So this is what's active currently. And again, these are kind of, think of these as pre-done filters for you. So this is what's currently active. So as you can see, I, as John Patterson, I've already delegated to Christelle the ability to approve the time, as well as to put in absence requests for me. Now, if we want to see the one that we just created, it's under submitted. So this is pending Christelle and admin accepting this delegation. Okay. So again, if you wanted to see ones that were accepted, you would click here, anything that might have been ended or rejected or revoked. And I'll talk about how they become active and ended a little bit later when I talk about the maintain delegation administration. Okay. So then the last thing is, the last tile on here is my delegated authorities. And this shows what transactions have been delegated to you. So here it's waiting for my approval, but Christelle had delegated to me, which is kind of a bad thing because it's I realize it's circular. But Christelle had delegated the approve reported time and manage approve repayable time. So if they were active ones, so we do have that's in submitted, but what is currently would be active is admin has delegated to me to manage the report time fluid, and Rosanna has also done a delegation. So what you could do from here is you can go ahead and accept it right from here. So I can click on that and I would put accept or possibly reject. So that's the basics of my delegated authorities. I do want to show you what the kind of difference is if you are in a clustered environment. So let's go here. And let's log in as Jay Patterson again, actually. So there are some subtle differences. Part of the differences is because not all of the information that can be found in HCM can be found in other pillars. So for instance, job data isn't necessarily found in FSCM like it is in HCM. They don't have a reporting hierarchy in FSCM. So you can't necessarily say, okay, I only show, say, my direct reports or my coworkers. So here, let's again go into delegations, and this is on the portal environment. So this is again in a clustered environment. And I'm just going to kind of highlight the differences. So we'll go into create delegation request. Again, we can select the dates. Let's make this one open-ended. Okay. So as you may have noticed, there is a lot more delegates here that you may not necessarily recognize from the usual demo data that we show, because this is showing basically everyone. They don't, on the FSCM side, because they don't have the reporting hierarchies, we can't necessarily display it in a common environment. But what you can do here is you can go ahead and add a delegate. And say I wanted to delegate to Vicky Zinn. Now, I don't know her user ID, so let's do a lookup. And in the search criteria, well, I don't even know what her description would be. So I don't know how it begins. So let's go ahead and show some operators. We say it contains Zinn. Ah, there's Vicky. So we'll select Vicky. And you will see that, sorry. Okay, here she is at the bottom, selected. So we go to next. So the other thing that you'll notice is let's filter by approve so that you can see the reported time change, but you also then see some transactions from FSCM, such as cash advances, expense reports, payment requests, financial structure request. These are all approvals on the FSCM side, but they are commingled with the HCM requests so that you can see them all in one place. So if you have people who are working in both environments and you don't want them to have to go to one environment over the other, you can go ahead and in a Porto environment, give them access to both of these. Okay, let's go back to our other environment. Okay, so let's log out as John and let's go in as a delegate instead. So let's go in as Christelle. If you remember, John delegated to her that PTO coverage delegation. Again, we click on the delegations tile. And this time we go to my delegated authorities. So here's the transaction we just put in. We can go ahead and accept it from here. Now my approvals were acting up a little bit last night. So hopefully this one works. But if not, we can always just go on. Okay. So as you can see, things have changed a little bit, and I will go over the changes and the functionality. Oh my. Okay. I may have to log out of this. Okay, let's try that again. And I don't recommend you just closing down like that. That's probably part of my problems, but but Sean can scold me about that later. Okay, so let's get back into delegations. So that is the delegated authorities. That's how it works, and you can see where you've had things delegated to you. So let's see how this actually works in reality with the transactions. So John had also delegated the manage absence request. So let's go into the team time and look at request absence. So Christelle has her own direct reports that she manages absences for. But what you'll see on the request absence is now there's this field up here that says acting as, and she can work on her own employees, or she can work as the proxy for John Patterson. And as you notice, the list of employees changed at that point. So she can go in here and request an absence, say for Abigail Smith. Maybe Abigail called in sick, and so she needs to put that in for her because she can't get to a computer. So that's one way that delegations are used. And the other way is in the actual approvals. And I do apologize, this will take a while, and it's because we have some really old approval demo data out there. So I know that all of your approval data will be much cleaner than this, so it will not be this slow. Okay, so here we are in the approvals. So let's look at the reported time. So previously, John has, obviously delegated to to Christelle before. And for transactions that come in that are delegated to you, you will see that it's been delegated by John Patterson or by whoever it is. Now, once you approve this transaction, it will show you as the approver and not John Patterson. So that's a question that I often get, but it will retain you as the approver. So you do have an audit trail there. Okay, so let's now go in and look at some administrator capabilities. So we'll log in as PS. Okay. And then let's go to enterprise components. And delegation. Normally you could use the search, but because we are going to be looking at a few of these pages, I thought it would be best if we use the nav bar. So here we start with installation settings. Like in most modules, there is some type of installation. Oh, actually, you know what? I don't need to go through this. Sorry, I went to the wrong thing. I jumped ahead. I actually want to show administer delegation. I will be showing you the configuration, but that's going to be a little bit later. Okay, so here, administer delegation. We have the delegator. You can pick who it is. So let's say for Rosanna Chaney, or let's say John, we'll keep John. We'll search for all the things that he, transactions that he has delegated. Now, if you wanted to see more detail of these, so you can see who the delegator was, who they, and here it is the delegate or the proxy, the start and end date and the status of it. So as an administrator, I can either want to filter more, so I can filter and say, okay, let's see where he's delegated to Christelle. And then I could say, select one of these and I could revoke it as an administrator. So say you had that temporary delegation done because someone has left the company, but now somebody has come in and taken over the position, you can go ahead and revoke those delegations and the person can go ahead and start doing that job. Okay. From here, as an administrator, I can also add delegation request. And this will be a little bit different. So what it is I can go in and create the delegation request. You will see the activity guide like we did in the normal one. The only difference is here, it will show you who you're acting as. So now, even though I may be logged in as PS, I will be creating a delegation with John Patterson as the delegator and whoever I select as the delegate. So this is some, as I said, some administrator function that you can, that's available to you as well. Okay. So let's go ahead, go back to the, let's go back to our presentation. Okay. So just to recap, some of the new functionality that I've shown you is that it is available across pillars. So you can see FSCM and HCM, and you can actually view the transactions commingled. You can create a delegation request. Oh, actually, I didn't show you that. But you can create a delegation request from the action menu on the approvals. You have the delegation information on approvals. You'll see delegated by John Patterson. That was that line. You can select multiple delegates. That was a big ask that from our customer focus group. Cascading delegations. Now, I didn't talk about this, but this is where you can delegate things that have been delegated to you. So, for instance, Rosanna Channing can delegate to John Patterson, and then John Patterson can delegate that same transaction to Christelle Stevenson. Okay, so that is 2 levels. Christelle now, because she's the second level, cannot go ahead and delegate it further. So in that case, that's the 2 levels. And we'll look at the configuration for this. You need to select it on a installation level and then on a transaction level. We have the new delegation dashboard that you saw with the 3 tiles. And this last one, we didn't see it, but I'll show you the configuration for it. And this is where a delegator can retain the authority to approve. So what this means is that even though they delegate it, they'll still get the approval notifications. It'll be on their approval board. They can go in and approve, as well as the delegate going in and approving. This may be useful in situations such as I'm working on a project, I really need to focus on that, but I still want to see what approvals are going on. I can still see that and monitor it, and on occasion, if I've got some free time, I can go in and do it. But if I'm not able to do it, my delegate can still go in and approve for me. So now let's look at some configuration. Okay. So here again, I said the installation settings is where it all begins. The days after current date, when the user is checked to see if they're available for delegations, this number will be added to the current date when you have left that end date blank in the delegation request. And this is checked by the Maintain Delegated Authorities program. Cascade delegations, this is to turn on that cascading feature. Now, turning it on here will not do anything. You also have to turn it on at the individual transaction level, but we'll see that in a little bit. Excuse me. Override application allows the applications to control how the create delegations activity guide works, as well as the admin create delegation request. We saw both of those. For instance, HCM has an app class to filter proxies or select employee job and get user data. So in the case of filter proxies, you saw where in HCM, we had a much more succinct list of proxies or delegates, whereas in the portal, it just kind of showed us everyone because it doesn't have necessarily the idea of proxy or the information for, or hierarchy. It doesn't have hierarchy information. Okay. This configure application button is only in only in HCM. Once you click it, then it comes out to one, being able to select whether you use fluid delegation. The administrator role, as you saw in our demo, there is some capability for an administrator to monitor the delegations. This is where you specify the role associated with that administrator. Okay. The enabled hierarchies, this is what I've been talking about. In HCM, we can say, okay, use this hierarchy. And you can specify which delegates that a delegator gets to choose from. Now, the specific hierarchy allows you to set it based on manager self-service access types. That's why these probably look very familiar to you. And you can also allow the delegator to use any person in your organization as a delegate by using this all persons checkbox. If you have both the all person and specific hierarchy turned on, like it is here, then the hierarchy selection becomes a preference rather than a requirement. So as you saw, we saw the hierarchy, but we also had the add delegate button that will be displayed if this all persons is turned on. You can also choose whether you want to include contingent workers or persons of interest as possible delegates. Okay. The AWE transactions must be registered on the workflow transactions page. You would need to associate the approval process ID that you have defined for a particular transaction on this page. This will also allow the self-service transactions to automatically invoke the approval framework. On the details 2 page here, you use the delegate initiation and delegate approvals checkboxes to enable them for both initiations and approvals. And the combined partial checkbox will have the system continue searching for a department manager even after it has found a partial position reports to manager in our demo that we saw. Deselect this to have the system stop searching for the manager ID once it is found by one of the access types. Limit drill up enables the system to continue to drill up an access type until a manager is found. Deselect this if you want the system to only go up to the next level. Configure delegation transaction. So this is on a transaction by transaction basis. As you can see here, the transaction is absence cancellation. So security is, right now in our data, we deliver for HCM, for initiate transactions, a role and component. And so when a delegation transaction is active, the delegation framework temporarily assigns the specified role to the delegate, which grants the delegate access to the specified component. In FSCM, for instance, this isn't used, or this hasn't been used by us because their requirement was that both people need to have security to that component before the delegation can occur. So that's the other difference you'll see in the delegation selection is only people who have access, who ordinarily have access to that transaction will be a delegate. Display link level, this is a holdover from HCM delegations framework. It doesn't currently serve a purpose in the Fluid framework. So if you're putting in Fluid, you can ignore that for now. Delegation event handler class, use these fields to identify specific product-specific application classes. So it will come into play when they click on the delegation link and how you may want to direct them to delegation pages. Cascade delegations. This is where I talked about Rosanna being able to delegate to John and John delegating the same transaction to Christelle. We turned it on at the installation level, you saw in installation settings, but for each individual transaction that you want this to apply to, you also need to turn it on here. Okay. And then the include delegator, choose this, again, if you want the approver to retain the ability to see the transaction as well as approve it. Again, this is something we turned on at the installation level and have to turn on again at the transaction level. This maintain delegated authorities. This is that program that activates all delegation transactions that were future dated. So for instance, that transaction that I set up to delegate to from John Patterson to Christelle and Edmund, starting the 23rd of March, it will look at that, and when the 23rd comes along, it will make that active. But before that, it will remain inactive. So it makes the future data become active on the current date or on the start date. Sorry. As part of this process, it will reassign pending approvals to the delegate. So this was very important, for instance, in time and labor. So if John on the 23rd, it assigns, the ability to approve time to Edmund and Christelle. Well, anytime that John hasn't approved, that will also move over to Christelle and Edmund to be able to take action on that. It revokes all delegation requests that have expired as of the current date. So that delegation that we set up to end on the 20th, on the 23rd, well, actually on the 21st, it would expire that, and it would no longer, it would make that inactive. And it also searches for inactive delegates, and it will flag them. So this process should be set up to be scheduled, should be scheduled to run on a daily basis. Okay. So you see, let's go back up. So you click on process request dialog, this will come up, and make sure you select EODL batch and you click OK. So there are some considerations for a clustered environment, and this is when you cluster, say, a FSCM and an HCM environment together. So one of the things you have to do is you have to deploy the service to all environments. To do this, you go to the Integration Network Work Center, and here's the navigation to it. You click on this introspection and deployment, and you come up with this. So select the service of EODL integrations, and then you click search, and then you select this EODL integration. It will bring back anything. So if you did, say, a partial, it will bring out all the search results, but only click on EODL integrations. Click continue. Select the nodes that you want to process. So in our case, this is the HCM node and this is the FSCM node. So we select it and you continue. And it's just kind of recapping what it will do and do introspect. So here, if there was anything that needed to be deployed, it would basically say deployment needed here. In our case, we didn't have any, so it all says no deployment action necessary. So it's something that you can check along the way as well. But if there was deployment needed, you would click it to select it and click on the deploy. Okay, so approval setup. So Sean, do you want to go ahead and just let me know when you want me to change slides?
Yeah, I'll walk through this quick. I'm going to assume a lot of you have used AWE for approval setup. So it's just to highlight a few of the things that you can change and or should change, and to meet your own approval requirements. So go ahead, next slide. So we did deliver a specific or an updated approval process definition for our approval process ID for fluid delegations. So it's now called fluid delegation instead of just delegation. There's also several others for the batch process and the revoke process and others. And so this one version that you're seeing here is shipped as part of the update unit of work to move to fluid delegations. We have a script that does all the inserts and everything else. Right now, it's a pretty pretty much a clone of what was delivered in the HCM, the original delegation. So there's a single stage, step, and path, or excuse me, stage, path, and step. The path and the step always route to the delegate for approval, and once they approve the request, then that will then call in to see if there's any transactions to delegate, or if it's future dated, as Lisa pointed out, the batch job will pick it up when that delegation becomes active. Next slide. So as I just pointed out, we deliver it, so it's set to always true. So there are no conditions or criteria to determine how the routing is done. All right, I guess I recapped that on the first slide. So go ahead, next slide. So if you want to modify it, just as you do with all the other AWE transactions, it's, ideally you would clone if you have not, you've taken the unit of work, you haven't turned on fluid delegation, and you went in to modify the approval process. As everyone should know, until the approval process for that definition ID is used, the setup is configurable. But in order to avoid overwriting it in the future, you'd be better off doing the clone process, clone it, save it with the new date, add any stages, paths, steps that you need, or modify the one that we deliver. If you want to change criteria, you want to add, additional criteria around whatever's set up, you can do that. You can also change the user list. So if you want to include, that employee's manager or some other person that was a peer to the delegate, you can do anything you want. It's all the same flexibility of AWE. Once you've confirmed that the setup is right and you're ready to enable it, obviously set the status to active, and that will become the default approval process or the approval definition that everyone will use, or date-wise. The only request right now is not to modify the definition ID. There's no reason not to. I think it's not really necessary. And also, you can just focus on, so go ahead and go to the next page. Sorry, Lisa. So what I mean by that, we have process ID, definition ID, and effective date. So essentially leave the process ID and the definition ID the same, change the effective date for when you want to have your new rules take effect. The one thing that we don't have in place is the approval process setup. So this process setup process definition page is not shared in a clustered environment. So you will have to set up rules for HCM, ELM, campus, and FSCM, depending on which pillars you use and which transactions are delegated. So it is possible to have different approval rules for HCM than you have for FSCM. You can also have different administrators. You have these other actions can all be different. So go ahead and continue. So I just took a few snapshots of the cloning process. So essentially, when you copy or clone the fluid approval process, fluid delegation, you get the same definition ID with new effective date. Go ahead. So it defaults into today's date. This is the setup for stages, paths, and steps. All right, Lisa, you grabbed the wrong slide deck or image. Go back one, please. So in this case, this approval, you might go forward one. So when you do a clone, okay, you're going too far or too fast. I need you on the this page, stages, paths, and steps, things. When you do a clone and that transaction has not been used, all of the elements on this grid are active. So essentially you could add additional stages. There's plus buttons for stages, paths, steps. As you add new rows, then you would go in and modify the criteria, user list, and other details that are related to the approval. So go ahead and go to the next. So I didn't expand on the criteria definition, again, assuming everyone's used it. Always true, routes every single time. We don't do any criteria check. Application classes are your own. If you can't define criteria for approvals based on a record and field combination, then you can always use your own application class. The user entered, again, is based on records or views that you define and then select fields from and values that meet your criteria. Go ahead, next slide. I think that's the last one. Oh, the user list. Yeah, so if you want to expand the user list, so as I said, it just routes to the delegate. If you want to pull in administrators or supervisors or whatever you choose to, you can use your own user list, just as you would in any other transaction. All right, and then the last, I think this is the last slide.
Yeah, that's the last slide.
Okay. So again, very high level, but all of this is documented in PeopleBooks. If you look in the court functionality, it's in all of the PeopleBooks. I know there's a number of KM documents that support is posted as well. And that's it as far as modifying the approval process. So as soon as you change the definition ID with a new effective date, then when that effective date becomes active, that's the transaction or the definition ID that we'll go to, and not the old one. All right, go ahead,
okay.
Lisa.
Okay, so on our roadmap, we only have a couple items right now, but that's because the first one is quite big. So the roadmap, to remind you, is what we expect to, or that we're targeting to deliver in the next 12 to 18 months. So the first one is delegation criteria and limits. This is the ability to specify criteria limits when creating delegations. For example, you may want one delegate to be able to approve expense reports, but only to a certain dollar limit, and then have another delegate approve reports over that dollar limit. So delegation or criteria and limits on approvals is used quite extensively in FSCM and not so much in HCM, or not at all in HCM. So this has to be built into delegations, as well as the fact that it's already in the AWE approval itself. So single transaction actions is the other thing that is on the roadmap currently, and this will is an enhancement to the design to allow users to be able to take actions such as revoke or accept or reject on individual transactions. So right now, for instance, if you give someone multiple transactions in our in our demonstration, I showed we gave the ability to approve reported time as well as payable time to Christelle. Well, Christelle right now has to accept or reject both of those, but in the future she can say, well, I'll accept the reported time, but I reject the payable time, for instance. Okay, so that was it. So now, Emily, do we have any questions?
Yes, so we have received a couple of questions. The first one is, does the delegation search require Elasticsearch functionality?
No.
No.
No, so those are just normal search like you would do for prompt tables.
Great. The next question is, what tools version do you have to be on to get fluid delegation? Also, what PUM contains this functionality?
So it's not built on any, well, there it's built on the core fluid functionality. So I believe that's 85410. So if you are on currently supported versions of tools, so 856, 857, even if you're on 855, there shouldn't be any issues. But obviously, I'm encouraging you to move to a supported version of tools. As far as the PUM image, there is a version that went out. The initial version for Fluid went out to financials last September. I believe it was PUM image 33. We can get the exact number.
Yes.
So with HCM, thanks, Lisa. With HCM, it went out in January with their image 33.
No, 34.
34.
Oh, no, 33. Sorry. No, you're right. You're right. It was 33. Sorry.
Okay. So what we are doing now is we're reconciling some of the differences between HCM and FSCM, given the 4-month difference in delivery. So FSCM will get a minor update within I think in their PUM image 35 or wrapping up in 36. But it's essentially available for HCM, FSCM, ELM, and then over the next set of images, it'll roll out to the rest of the product lines. For those of you that don't know how we deliver enterprise components, it's developed internally, and then we do our best to make sure that every single, so it's developed by my team, and then we push a common version out to every single product in PeopleSoft. So sometimes the dates all stagger a little bit, as you know, that the PUM images are on different schedules. So.
Great. Next question is, for multiple delegates, does that mean one delegate per transaction or multiple delegates per transaction?
Multiple delegates per transaction. So you can do multiple delegates and multiple transactions. Each delegate will get all of those transactions, but you can assign like multiple delegates at once.
Will the system be able to identify a circular approval reference before it is set up?
No, not before it's set up. So because we're not evaluating approval rules until that individual transaction is submitted. So we don't know what between the definition ID and the approvals rules set up for that definition ID, we don't know if there's a cycle or a circular reference.
So, but once it's submitted, is it identified?
Like, oh yeah, it is identified, and no, right. So it's when the approval is submitted, and we find the circular reference, we stop. So right now, if John Doe submitted a request and went to Jane Smith, and Jane Smith delegated it to John Doe, we would actually route that to John Doe to approve. So that's kind of where some of the approval rule modifications would come in if you didn't want the requester to, in this case, John Doe being the requester, if you didn't want him to approve his own transactions, you would disable some of the self-approval criteria. within AWE.
Would it be possible to use, sorry?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Would it be possible to use AWE to route an initial approval step to an HR administrator before sending to the delegate?
Yes. Yeah, so that's where you would set up, you would clone the definition that we deliver, and then you would go ahead and modify and add a new stage or step to route to the HR administrator before it routes to the delegate.
Great. Are there any delivered notifications for when a request is submitted or approved?
Yes, so I don't remember how many notifications we send out, but I believe there's 5. So when it's routed to the approver to approve, when it's finally approved or denied or whatever, it goes back to the requester, so the person, the delegator, and the delegates. Then we also have a couple around error conditions, but again, with approvals, that's pretty configurable. So if it's not going to the person you want it to go to, you can go in and modify and add, additional options.
Okay, and we have 2 more questions. Is this an escalation, or is there an escalation approval functionality if it's not approved within X amount of days?
So it is not delivered that way. The escalation process is delivered with AWE, but we don't have any defaults as far as saying 5 hours or 12 hours or 12 days or whatever. That would be configurable through the approval process definition setup page. So as you're defining, either going in and modifying the one we deliver or cloning and modifying with a new effective date, you can go in and set the timeout values. So we call them timeout values just because it's been hard to find the right set of terms, but you can define what you want it to do. So if you want it to notify after 3 hours and then reroute to the administrator after a day, you can do that. And then I believe 2 years ago, we actually added a cancel transaction option. So if someone didn't accept the delegation after, say, 4 days, you could actually cancel their delegation request.
Great. And last question, without customization, can it be set up such that the delegator and delegate get approval requests?
Yes.
It's an option. That was one of the options on the
include delegator checkbox. Yeah, the include delegator checkbox on the installation and the transaction, that will accomplish that.
Great. So that was all of our questions. Do either of you have any closing thoughts before we end for today?
No, except the fact that I hope that you enjoy the improvements that we've made on it, or if you are brand new to delegations, that you go out and use it. It's quite a powerful and useful tool. We've used it quite extensively in HCM, and hopefully other pillars will see the value and start to use it as well.
And I have no comments. I'm okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you again for joining us. And as a reminder, we did record this session and it'll be uploaded to the Quest Content Library here soon. All right. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.
Thank you.